Today, the state of Colorado is an epicenter of American skiing. The state has over 30 active downhill ski areas. Some of them are large, internationally recognized resorts, while others are small town hills. Colorado is also home to reportedly over 100 lost ski areas. While most of these places were small local hills, there are a few notable exceptions, including Cuchara, Conquistador, Berthoud Pass, and Geneva Basin. In this video, we'll take a deep dive into Geneva Basin, today largely forgotten and unknown by many. Alright, with the introduction out of the way, let's begin the video. The history of downhill skiing at Geneva Basin dates back to the early 1960s. In 1959, Jack English, a successful entrepreneur, opened up Indian Head Mountain in Michigan. In 1962, English formed a group of investors and developed a new ski area called Indian Head Mountain. The corporation installed a small lodge along with a Heron double chairlift, Constam T-bar, and tow lifts. Located directly south of the town of Georgetown, Colorado, Indian Head only opened on January 25, 1963, and closed the first week of March. Later that year, English announced a comprehensive 2-year development proposal that would have included the installment of snowmaking, 2 more rope tows, and an expansion to the day lodge. English announced that the rope tow lift would operate 7 days a week, with the chairlift being relegated to weekend status. With the new investment into snowmaking, Indian Head was the first to open in Colorado, opening on November 18, 1963. Indian Head sat on an extremely remote section of road south of Georgetown, northwest of Grant, Colorado. As part of English's investment into the resort, the county regraded the section of the road from Grant to the ski hill. Indian Head's biggest weakness was truly the remoteness of the resort and the treacherous access road. With other mountains offering easier access and boasting better terrain, Indian Head suffered financially. In 1965, the mountain went into receivership and was bailed out by former Governor Roy Romer, as well as the Burke family. The new corporation had shares which were divided between the two parties. The name was changed from Indian Head to Geneva Basin. That summer, a new intermediate run was cut and a beginner Poma platter was built. This platter opened up a dedicated beginner area and indirectly replaced a rope tow. The county additionally was able to put more funds into maintaining the road. In 1966, lift tickets at Geneva Basin cost $3 for a half day and $4 for a full day, though the ski area reduced operations to weekends only in 1967. In 1968, Geneva Basin once again expanded the day lodge and cleared additional trees on an expert run. Lift ticket prices were also increased by 50 cents, and the ski area reverted to operating Wednesday through Sunday. Geneva Basin was able to expand their skiable terrain in 1967 with the installation of a new Poma platter. This lift traveled up into a treeless bowl and opened up several new runs of varying difficulty. Geneva Basin, being much newer, significantly smaller, and fairly remote, found it difficult to attract new skiers. To attract new skiers, Geneva Basin began offering all-inclusive ski tours, partnering with local hotels. Other ski resorts did the same. The Geneva Basin's prices were still the lowest. Apparently, in 1972, the majority of Geneva Basin stock was bought by a Kansas-based investment group. In 1974, this group replaced the Sundance T-bar with a Heron-Poma double chair. The mountain also reverted back to 7-day operation under the new ownership. Perhaps influenced by the ownership, Geneva Basin began holding more Farmers Union ski trips. The mountain hosted the North and South Dakota Farmers Unions in 1975 and the Nebraska Farmers Union in 1976. In 1976, the Duddens, a western Nebraska family, purchased the majority of stock in the Geneva Basin Ski Corporation. At this time, the mountain had 21 trails and was mostly utilized as a day trip mountain from Denver. The Duddens announced that they would extensively promote the mountain to skiers in Nebraska. The Duddens also rebranded the ski area slogan to "Take a Genevacation." Additionally, the ski area offered any Hidden Valley Seasons Pass holders free access to the resort anytime. The 1976-77 ski season was terrible. Inadequate snowfall forced the early season closure of many prominent resorts. Aspen was down 59% in skier days, Vail was down 35% in skier days, Steamboat was down 73% in skier days, and Geneva Basin was down 90% in skier days. The resort apparently almost went out of business, dropping from 40,000 skiers in 1975 to 1976 to 2,000 skiers in 1976 to 1977. The resort did not go out of business, however, but began to add a $400,000 snowmaking expansion project in the summer of 1977. For one reason or another, the snowmaking expansion was never completed. According to ColoradoSkiHistory.com, the resort changed ownership several times through the latter half of the 1970s. This would not surprise me if it were true, though I have no other sources to prove this. The 1980 to 1981 ski season was another disaster for Geneva Basin, as a snow drought hit the resort, forcing it not to operate a single day. The 1981 to 82 season was a bit better for the mountain, which was able to sell 33,000 lift tickets the entire year. In 1984, an empty chair detached from the haul rope of the Duck Creek chairlift. This prompted the Colorado Tramway Board to shut the lift down until the issue could be sorted out. Geneva Basin was sold in 1984 to a new investment group who announced a reopening of the mountain. They also announced a name change from Geneva Basin to Alpenbach. When they tried to open for the 1984 to 1985 ski season, they were unable to do so. The aging Duck Creek chair was removed in the summer of 1985, and a new Borvig triple called Phoenix was partly installed. Running in a completely different alignment, it replaced both the double and the upper Poma lifts. However, in late 1985, Alpenbach ran into financial issues and were unable to make payments to Borvig. Thus, the lift was never finished. Reportedly, they declared bankruptcy and everything on the mountain was stripped. The mountain's special use permit was revoked in 1986 by the U.S. Forest Service. In 1991, a local contractor made a proposal to the U.S. Forest Service to operate Geneva Basin. Under this proposal, the resort would be renamed to Alpine Valley and would finally finish the snowmaking pond and the triple chair. There was no opposition to this proposal, but nothing came out of it. After two more failed reopening proposals in 1992, the county proposed a special tax which would have contributed to the ski area's reopening. This tax was voted down. 2 days after the vote, the Forest Service burned down the lodge at Geneva Basin and ripped out all the lift towers, which was the final nail in the coffin for skiing at Geneva Basin. Geneva Basin was overall a fairly small mountain that really only ever had two terrain pods. The mountain was also predominantly steep, mostly geared towards experts. To better understand the mountain, let's work our way run by run across Geneva Basin. The original Duck Creek chair was undoubtedly the main lift at Geneva Basin. Starting from the parking lots near the base lodge, this chair was 3,100 feet long and had an elevation gain of 928 feet. This chairlift got fairly steep in certain areas, with the steepest slope being 62%. There were several options that graded the skier at the top of the chair. If one were a beginner skier, one could take Timberline's Turnpike, which would deposit the skier in the more beginner-friendly Sundance terrain pod. From there, the skier could ski down either Sundance or Heidi's Cutoff, before either skiing to the Sundance chair or back to the Duck Creek chair via the passage run. There wasn't a whole lot for intermediates on the front side of Geneva Basin. The upper Poma, which could easily be reached from the Duck Creek chair, took skiers above the timberline to the highest point in the resort. The Poma serviced a nice open bowl that doesn't look too intimidating. For the expert skier, the front side was the place to be. Tree-cut runs such as Henry's Holler, Tomahawk, or Knickerknocker all branch out directly off the Duck Creek chair. Of these runs, Henry's Holler gets the steepest, with a maximum slope gradient of 59%. Let's briefly discuss the Phoenix triple chair. Partly installed by Borvig, this lift would have replaced the old Duck Creek chair and the Poma, which would have provided a ride directly from the base lodge to the summit. From the top of the Poma or the Phoenix triple chair, there were 2 or 3 runs. Jolly Time ran partly down the triple chair line and met up with Silver Streak, which then looped the skier past the Bunny Hill and base lodge back to the chair. Finally, North Bowl offered some truly advanced above treeline skiing. Now, let's move down to the Sundance terrain pod. This chair serviced the majority of the beginner and intermediate terrain offerings that Geneva Basin had. Built by Heron-Poma and replacing a Constam T-bar, the Sundance chair was 2,600 feet long and had an elevation gain of 700 feet. From the summit, beginner skiers could take the aforementioned Sundance or Heidi's cutoff runs, which look to be long, pleasant groomers. There's also a small, relatively flat beginner trail named Garrett's Glade that the skier could take from the passage to get back to the Sundance Chair. On the skier's left side of the Sundance Chair were Geneva Basin's intermediate terrain offerings. Corkscrew and Brett's Bend are the two main runs in this area, which both funnel down to one intermediate run, the Pines. Finally, there was one black run that ran directly under the Sundance Chair. Known as Doc's Delight, this run wasn't as intense as the frontside runs, but offered more terrain variety for Geneva Basin. Even after producing this entire video, I'm still confused on the complete story behind Geneva Basin. Although, it's still a shame that the mountain didn't survive past the 1980s. While its location undoubtedly was one of the driving factors behind its struggles, I have to imagine that if it weathered the storms, it would still be a relatively popular local mountain today. Geneva Basin, though it was fairly small, really did have a good variety of terrain, which many small mountains today simply lack. Unfortunately, it's unlikely that this resort will ever come back. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing. And until next time, this is Skier72.